Tonight, the youngest victims of Israel's war against Hezbollah. Up to 20 children are killed, burnt, crushed or critically injured by Israeli airstrikes each day.
All civilian. They from why? No.
In Washington, talks about talks, but little hope of a ceasefire. That's as a senior Lebanese minister tells me he's confident his government can disarm Hezbollah.
You need some time. You need some foreign help. You need resources, both military and otherwise.
And as Donald Trump's blockade enters its second day, a warning that any escalation could trigger a global recession. With the UK likely the worst affected of the most advanced economies, our economics editor will explain why. And it's not just that. The UK's national security is also at risk, according to experts. So will Iran be a wake-up call? We'll discuss that coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening from Beirut. I'm Yalda Hakim. It's been nearly a week since the day many are now describing as Black Wednesday. 10 minutes of non-stop Israeli bombardment, which left more than 350 people dead. These images show some of the civilians who were killed, among them 33 children. And that's where I want to start the programme tonight, with the youngest and most vulnerable victims of Israel's war with Lebanon. And with the first direct face-to-face talks between the two countries in decades. Significant, yes, but only the first step towards more substantial ceasefire negotiations. Have a listen.
We're on the same side of the equation. And that's the most positive thing we could have come away with. We are both united in liberating Lebanon from an occupation power dominated by Iran called Hezbollah.
That was Israel's ambassador to the US speaking after the talks in Washington. He seems to think Israelis will soon be holidaying across the border. But the government here sees things differently. They say Israel is harming their chances of reaching an agreement with Hezbollah. We'll bring you my conversation with Lebanon's culture minister in a moment, after this report from our special correspondent Alex Crawford.
She moves her fingers as she recognises her nurse's voice. But with nearly half her body burned in an Israeli airstrike, any movement at all is painful. Her name is Zainab. She's only 12, and her entire family was killed in the same attack she barely survived. She still doesn't know that her parents and 2 young siblings have all been killed. Her brother was 5. Her baby sister wasn't quite 2 years old. Zainab constantly asks for her mother. Her only 2 visitors are her aunt and uncle, and they can't bring themselves to tell her the brutal truth right now.
All civilian. They from why? No one knows. They're not fighting. It doesn't have any bomb. It doesn't make any bad thing for anyone. If I was in our house, she's alone. She's alone. We are the only family. This is very bad issue. Yeah.
The sole survivor in just one family affected is still critically ill and not out of danger yet.
This has been a particularly deadly war for children. Sometimes it's hard to grasp statistics, but 33 children were killed in just one day's airstrikes. 166 have been killed in the past 6 weeks since the latest flare-up, since the beginning of March. And 650 have been left badly wounded or hurt.
These are some of the faces of those killed in the 10-minute Israeli military rampage across Lebanon last Wednesday. The number of women, the number of families, the number of child fatalities stands out. Many of the children suffered crush injuries. Both the legs of this 11-year-old boy were broken when his home collapsed around him. But that wasn't all. A 3D scan shows how his jaw is shattered too. He's lost some of his front teeth. The dark line you see in the chin area is the break in his jaw and mouth, which will need to be knitted together so that he can eat again. The Israeli military insists it's targeting Hezbollah militants, but the medics in Lebanon say the numbers of children hurt and killed are abnormally high.
If you compare it to the Russia-Ukraine war, less than 1% of the casualties in Ukraine are actually children. In Gaza, if you're looking at just fatalities, the most recent study showed that 30% of the fatalities are children. In Lebanon to date, we're around 14% of the casualties are children. So this kind of gives you a reflection of how discriminatory, in spite of having such technology and weaponry that can really precisely assassinate, execute specific combatants, but at the same time you're seeing this high civilian mass casualty rate.
You can see the dust and the gravel inside the wounds.
A British Palestinian surgeon is caring for many of the wounded children.
So if you look on the side, that collection on the left, that's the blood collecting.
One of his patients is a 9-month-old baby whose bedroom wall exploded onto her. Her head injuries led to blood building up and pressing on her brain.
You need to open up into the head and evacuate the blood.
And that sounds quite dangerous for a young child.
It is very dangerous for a young child. And one of the most disturbing things is at the hospital, because we treat war wounded children, not just in this war, in the previous war. We now have the world's largest cohort of traumatic brain injury in children as a result of war.
The baby's mother has asked we don't identify her, but she shares pictures of her wounded little girl. The young couple with their first baby had already fled their home and were in a friend's apartment when a bomb brought down the wall, burying their daughter.
I stand up, my husband came, started searching for her. Of course, all the other people with us came to search for her. She was under the... I don't like to remember. She was under the rocks, and they pulled her. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. My husband ran with her and he took her to the nearest hospital.
This war has hit Lebanon's young in shockingly high numbers, killing or injuring around 20 children every day since early March, and leaving a legacy of suffering. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Lebanon.
Alex's report there on the youngest victims of the war, and the baby at the end of that report is just 9 months old. And images like those you've just seen, well, they would have been at the forefront of the mind of the Lebanese ambassador to the US as she held face-to-face talks with her Israeli counterpart in Washington. Let's go straight to our US correspondent Mark Stone, who joins us live from Washington. And Mark, this is a country going into these talks, not necessarily negotiations at this point, under bombardment. Just give us a sense of how they went.
Yeah, it's hard after watching that to switch to the diplomacy, but there was positive diplomacy today in Washington, diplomacy at ambassadorial level. So we must, remember that. This isn't like ministers from the two countries are talking, but the Israeli ambassador to the United States and his Lebanese counterpart, they both got round a table with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, today. And they spoke for longer than we thought they would. There was due to be a meeting that would last about an hour. In the end, it lasted over 2 hours. So that is positive, for sure. But it's not as though this couldn't have happened some time ago. It could have done. And the Lebanese have said for quite some time, this relatively new Lebanese government in power since early 2025, has said, look, it is willing and actively trying to disarm Hezbollah. It wants to have negotiations with the Israelis. And yet all the time, the Israelis were saying no, 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 and continuing to bomb. And then Hezbollah was obviously firing back. So the conflict was ongoing between Hezbollah and Israel. And the Lebanese government, separate from Hezbollah, was saying, look, we're trying to do something about this, and we can't because you, Israel, continue to undermine us as the government of Lebanon by hammering Hezbollah. So this could have happened a long time ago. That notwithstanding, it has happened now. They are talking now, and so that much is positive. No white smoke, of course not. That's going to take much longer. But this is a first step, and that, after what Alex has just shown us, has got to be good news.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want you to stay with us, Mark, because what you've just said is exactly what a Lebanese minister told me today, that he's confident the government can disarm Hezbollah, but warned it's just going to take time. Ghassan Salameh also said he found it appalling that the Israeli Prime Minister made a surprise visit to southern Lebanon. I began by asking him about the significance of the talks.
It's an important moment. I am not sure I will go as far as saying it's historic. But this is not a discussion on substance. The discussion on substance will start when we get into negotiations. And it's hoped that the meeting today would somehow discuss the logistics of negotiations.
So could you then lay out clearly what it is that the Lebanese government expects and wants from these talks?
What we would like to see is that there is some pause in the military activity, and if possible a ceasefire. But at least a pause similar to the one that was negotiated in the Gulf between Iran and the Americans.
When I've spoken to Israeli officials, they've said they've laid out the principles of what they want, their demands very clearly, and they are a buffer zone where civilians don't return, and totally disarming of Hezbollah. Is that something that the Lebanese government can even achieve?
The Lebanese has started this process in last August. Now there are people who believe that you can disarm in a matter of a few hours or a few days. This is not the case. You'll need time for that. You'll need time not because you want to procrastinate. You'll need time because this particular armed group is well armed, has been training and arming itself for 43 years, and has been able to sustain a substantial weakening in 2024 and to go back into fighting in March 2026. So if the Israelis have been unable to produce a complete disarmament of Hamas in Gaza in more than 2 years, and after the destruction of 90% of what is built in Gaza, how do you expect a much smaller, much weaker army to do it in Lebanon?
And that's the main sticking point, though, for the Israelis, because they're saying it's just not happening fast enough, so we're going to take matters into our own hands. Do you think, then, that you could ever fully achieve the disarming of Hezbollah?
I think we are going to time. I can't fix a date right now, but we are going to a time where the monopoly of force will be back in the hands of the government. The state authority in this country has retreated in a very dangerous way from all domains, not only security, from banking, from different places. The objective of this government is to start re-establishing the state authority in all these domains. But the retreat has been so dramatic that the establishment of the state authority will not happen in a twilight. You need some time. You need some foreign help. You need resources, both military and otherwise financial, in order to re-establish the state authority. But if you ask me, are we on that road? My answer is clearly yes. We are on that road.
We heard from Hezbollah's Secretary General in the last 24 hours. No surrender, no face-to-face talks was his clear and very defiant message to his followers, to the Lebanese people. If that is the position of Hezbollah, do you then think that you know, what you're saying can be achieved if they're not willing?
I'm first happy to hear that everybody can express his views. I'm so proud of a country that has kept the freedom of expression despite everything. Now, of course, I don't agree with Sheikh Naim Qasim on that. First, because we have not ceased to have direct negotiation with the Israelis. There is nothing new to that. A few months ago, we were negotiating in Naqoura, face-to-face with the Israelis. In 1991, 92, we spent 3 years negotiating with the Israelis. In 2021, we negotiated the sea lanes, sea borders with the Israelis. In 1949, we had negotiated a truce with the Israelis. So the idea that something new is happening is just not accurate, not accurate.
What did you think when you saw that image of Benjamin Netanyahu on Lebanese territory?
I was appalled. I was appalled. It's my territory, it's not his. I was appalled by seeing him parading on the Lebanese territory. But this is not what shocks me most. It is the panorama around him and his chief of staff that appalled me even more. They are destroying villages, and sometimes with a lot of historical depth for the people there. Second, they are putting pressure on the vulnerable Lebanese fabric by sending hundreds of thousands of displaced persons who see what happens to their villages and come to the conclusion that they will not be able, contrary to what happened 30 or 40 years ago, to go back to these villages. So I would advise our neighbors to the south some more humility in the way they behave.
Dr. Salam, I just want to pick up on a point about disarming Hezbollah. You said you need time. So you're confident that the Lebanese government can disarm Hezbollah, but you just need time?
I'm confident that a day will come, not very far from today, where a new national consensus on how to best defend this country's autonomy and sovereignty will be reached. A consensus will be reached, and Hezbollah will be part of it, yes.
I mean, is that 5 years from now, 10 years from now? We're sitting here in this room, we can hear Israeli drones.
Yes, yes.
That is also the reality for the Lebanese people, and Hezbollah has stood as a militia.
But you have to have a vision. You have to have a vision, and the vision is not based only on today's events. It's based also on historical experience and persuasion. And then you can come with another outcome than what you are living today.
That was Ghassan Salameh talking to me there. Let's go back to Mark, who joins us from Washington. And Mark, the view from here in Lebanon, from the culture minister who's very close to the leadership here and in the know. But just give us a sense of what the Israelis are saying, because you were speaking to the Israeli ambassador to DC today.
Yeah, but first of all, I mean, that's the first time I've just heard that interview you just did. I was struck by that, the end of what he said there. That was his tone, his language. It was the language of hope. It was the language of having some direction. And I think that in this in this difficult time is really striking, and actually in a different way, and in a way that some will say is disingenuous. The Israeli ambassador was talking with some hope as well. Hope of Lebanon and Lebanese and Israelis living side by side in peace. I'll explain why some think it's disingenuous in a moment, but have a listen to the exchange. He had just come out of the meeting with the Lebanese ambassador and Marco Rubio at the State Department.
That's the change that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have brought across the region. With the degrading of Iran, this malign and malignant entity that's trying to destabilize the entire region, there is now the opportunity to degrade its proxies as well, to move them out of their horrific occupation of another country, and to move into an era where Lebanese and Israelis can live side by side in peace. And yes, vacation in each other's countries. It's not a pipe dream. It's a reality that can really happen in our lifetime.
But when will you stop? When will you cease fire? When will you stop fighting in Lebanon? When will you stop firing missiles at the Lebanese civilian infrastructure? I guess that's their question.
I want to push back on your question. Okay. Israelis don't wake up in the morning and look to fire missiles across the border. The missiles are being fired at our civilians. That will be put a stop to. We will not allow a terror organization to continually fire missiles into our population centers.
A really interesting statement there, just a bit of quite a lengthy statement he gave outside the State Department. So why is he being disingenuous? Why would some say that? Well, precisely because this Lebanese government has been saying for some time, for over a year now, we want to disarm Hezbollah. We think we can do it. We need help and we need time to do it. And we don't need to be undermined by a constant asymmetrical barrage of Israeli missiles of the type that we have seen over many days. And in fact, it was that one day last week when there were, over 100 strikes in less than 10 minutes across Lebanon. That is indiscriminate, so say the Lebanese, and it certainly doesn't help us when we try to disarm Hezbollah. So that's why it could be argued it's somewhat disingenuous. And more than that, Yalda, the Lebanese have been saying for ages, we want to do all this. We want to talk with you, Israel, and you don't seem to want to talk with us. Nothing has changed in the Lebanese position. What has happened today is the Israelis have come to meet the Lebanese position and literally meet the Lebanese in Washington. Why have they done that? Well, frankly, because President Trump saw what happened last week with that attack, so many attacks in just 10 minutes. And he said to Netanyahu, calm down, enough. Let's get talking. And that's why they are talking now. Baby steps, but positive for sure.
Mark, as always, thank you so much for your reporting and analysis. Now, here's the thing about war. It causes mass civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, psychological trauma, and as was the case with Ukraine and now with Iran, it often results in a global economic shock. Today, the International Monetary Fund warned the world could soon be plunged into the largest energy crisis in modern times if oil prices remain high for several months. The risk, says the IMF, is tremendous. Just have a listen.
The closing of the Strait of Hormuz and serious damage to critical energy facilities in the Middle East raise the prospect of a major energy crisis should a durable solution not be found soon. Oil and gas prices have increased sharply, and so have the prices of diesel and jet fuel, fertilizer, aluminum, and helium. Our severe scenario assumes that energy supply disruptions extend into next year, with greater macro instability. Global growth falls to 2% this year and next, while inflation exceeds 6%. Downside risks are clearly very elevated.
The view there from the IMF, or the US is imposing its own blockade on Iranian ports. This time-lapse video shows activity around the strait in the 24 hours after the blockade started yesterday afternoon. And while the United States' status as an energy exporter means America is partially insulated from the economic impact, the same can't be said for the UK. Britain will see the biggest downgrade in economic growth and one of the highest rates of inflation as a result of this war. So why will the UK be so badly hit? Our economics and data editor Ed Conway has this assessment.
So we've just had the latest forecast from the International Monetary Fund. Basically, every 6 months they kind of update their forecasts on the state of the economy, and we've just had their update when it comes to the impact of what's happening in Iran, in the Gulf. This is what they were forecasting for economic growth across the G7, so major industrialised economies for this year before the latest update, so before the impact of what's happening in Iran and elsewhere. And look at the UK in particular, so 1.3% growth, not enormously strong, but still, you know, it's kind of like towards the upper end of the pack. Now I'm going to show you these latest forecasts, just through from the IMF. Have a look at this. Same year. So that's all for 2026. And you can see how the UK goes down by 0.5 percentage points. That's a bigger downgrade than any other economy in the world. But worth saying, you know, everyone gets downgraded a bit. Even the US, which is a big energy exporter, and Canada get downgraded a little bit, but just a little bit, whereas the UK is down by 0.5 percentage point. So that's very big. And it's also in line with what the OECD, so another organisation, another kind of economic body, think. UK gets downgraded more than anyone else. And when it comes to inflation as well, so this is the inflation forecast for this year from the International Monetary Fund, the latest figures. And again, you can see, look, there's France at the bottom. There's the UK joint top in terms of our inflation rate expected for this year. So we have one of the highest rates of inflation. We have the biggest downgrade of economic growth, albeit not taking us to the kind of lowest rate of growth. A lot of people are going to wonder, why is it that the UK is being so badly affected? Part of the answer is that a lot of this comes back to energy, and we are a big energy importer. Not obviously, you know, everyone else, many of those other countries are, but nonetheless, it comes down to energy. And this is what the IMF thought was happening to energy prices last time around. That was their forecast for energy prices, things like oil, things like gas. This is what they now think is going to happen. Look at that big spike. So much higher energy prices are forecast now in this latest World Economic Outlook, their update on the state of the global economy. Final thing to note, there's an interesting dichotomy between the impact on countries that are energy exporters. So what this is basically showing you is, have there been upgrades or have there been downgrades to their economic growth forecast? That's energy exporters. And you can see, actually, energy exporters did kind of all right out of this because energy prices are higher, so they're making more money out of it. But energy importers get bigger downgrades. And that's basically where the UK is. It falls into this area. As for the Gulf, so those Gulf states, even though they're big energy exporters, they can't get that energy out because of the closure of the strait. And so they're seeing a big downgrade. But all told, essentially the IMF pointing out that this is bad for most countries around the world. But unfortunately, it is particularly bad for the UK.
Ed Conway reporting there. So the outlook for the UK, stagnant growth and rising inflation, is on the horizon, even as a former NATO chief has delivered a scathing assessment of the UK government's defence preparedness. Lord George Robertson has accused ministers of being unwilling to make the necessary investment, with a 10-year defence investment plan yet to be produced. Have a listen.
There is a corrosive complacency today in Britain's political leadership. Lip service is paid to the risks, the threats, the bright red signals of danger, but even the promised national conversation about defence can't be started. The cold reality of today's dangerous world is that we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget.
That was Lord George Robertson there. Well, our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes joins me now live from Salisbury. And Deborah, you were just in that room where that speech was taking place, and that criticism of complacency is really going to sting.
It is. I've got a copy of the speech here that he delivered in the Guildhall behind me, and local people came here to listen, as well as from further afield. And Salisbury, a site that's very known in the public conscience for Russian attacks, because it was in this place that Russia launched that Novichok attack back in 2018, that obviously was part of this Russian warfare hostilities that escalated then into that 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And Lord Robertson, like you said, he's a former NATO Secretary General. He's also a former Labour Defence Secretary, and he is the man that the Prime Minister asked to lead Keir Starmer's own defence review. It was published last year, this blueprint to transform what everybody acknowledges is the hollowed out state of the UK's armed forces. And Lord Robertson has kept quiet, he's been discreet. Yes, he's spoken out in Parliament about the parlous state of defence, but coming out tonight, he seemed to be doing it with a heavy heart, because obviously he's attacking his own government when it comes to their prioritisation of their spending plans. But he clearly feels that he has to speak out now. He has to take this stand. He was making this pointed remark about how Keir Starmer is talking strong on defence and yet failing to follow through with meaningful plans for actual spending. And he also takes aim at Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and the Treasury, talking about vandalism of non-military officials that are not meeting the moment when it comes to this urgent need to rearm. And he says that Iran, the war in Iran, needs to be a wake-up call for the whole country. It's not just about rebuilding defences, it's about much wider resilience. He talks about getting rid of the lethargic post-Cold War thinking and getting the whole country on a war footing. You heard in that quote just then about this national conversation. The Prime Minister said that the country, he wanted to start a national conversation on defence 18 months ago. Lord Robertson will be hoping that is what he is helping to achieve by speaking out tonight. And if no one needed a reminder, he ended his remarks saying that the clock is ticking. People are going to have to act.
Yeah, I mean, he talked there about lip service, but no real action, especially when it came to spending. He did this review, as you say. There are these targets, and yet he feels they're not being met.
No, and he was really clear. He talked about, he used actually the Prime Minister's own words against him in a sense. He talked about how Sir Keir Starmer, I mean, we both follow the Munich Security Conference each year. Sir Keir Starmer came out, spoke very strongly in Munich in February about the need for allies to galvanise and strengthen their defences. But then he stopped short on saying exactly how the UK was going to be then making that expenditure. He did it again in the wake of the Iran war, saying that there needs to be a line in the sand here and we're going to get strong with our defences. And Lord Robertson is saying very clearly tonight that this needs to actually happen. And he also talks about it needing to be a cross-party issue. This can't be something where we have the luxury of being able to have political point scoring when it comes to defence anymore. The hour is far too urgent and the need to act far too grave.
Yeah, extraordinary that he talked about this moment, this Iran war, being a wake-up call. Deborah, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Now, this is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live here from Beirut. Next up, can the US and Iran come back together for talks? And will the Strait of Hormuz stand in their way? I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim. I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back. Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim. You're watching The World live from Beirut. I'm Yalda Hakim. Well, we've been talking tonight about the global economic impact of Iran's war, outlined in stark terms by the International Monetary Fund. Well, let's speak now to Suzanne Maloney, Vice President and Director of the Brookings Institution's Foreign Policy Program. She previously advised both Democratic and Republican U.S. administrations on Iran policy. Thank you so much, Ms. Maloney, for joining us here on the program. Obviously, the Trump administration is trying to squeeze Iran in every way possible, including economically, and now the Strait of Hormuz is on the table. Do you think the path they're taking via the blockade is the right path in trying to sort of make the Iranians capitulate or surrender in some way?
Thanks so much, Yalda. I think it's a risky path because the Iranians still have alternative options to continue their own escalation in this war, and they have done so fairly effectively over the course of the past 6 weeks. And so I would be watching very closely what is happening with Saudi exports of oil through the East-West pipeline and Yanbu, the activities of the Houthis in the Red Sea. All of this could compromise further the global supply of oil at a time where there is already a deficit in the markets. And that would be a natural reaction for the Iranians under the current circumstances. I do think that there is a better prospect of achieving what we want to achieve through negotiations.
So you think that, that diplomacy should still be given a chance rather than trying to escalate or take a maximum approach when it comes to pressure, which clearly the Trump administration has tried over the last 6 weeks, and it's clearly not successful?
It has not been successful, and I think what we've seen with the blockade is an attempt to intensify the pressure, but really with an attempt, with an interest in seeing the Iranians provide additional concessions at the negotiating table. I don't believe that the Trump administration is eager to resume full hostilities with Iran because of the inevitable additional fallout that would have for markets and for the global economy. But obviously, they did not get what they wanted at Islamabad over the weekend, and there is now talk of a new round of negotiations. I think the blockade is intended to focus the mind of Iranian decision makers on the additional constraints that they would face if, in fact, they were not able to export their oil through the Strait of Hormuz. We haven't yet seen, as far as I can tell, an aggressive implementation of the blockade. So I think this is largely, at this point, part of the dance around negotiations.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's a pressure tactic, but it is being used. And economic experts, the IMF, are saying if this continues, and already it's going to take many months to go back to kind of the pre-war energy supplies and other things that are flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. It's going to take a long time to unpick the crises and the impact that it's already had.
That's absolutely true. And every day that it continues, the global economic impact will be magnified. And again, I think this is why the Trump administration sought to intensify the pressure to demonstrate that the Iranians that if they are trying to prevent the export of crude oil, natural gas, and other key products for the global economy, that the United States will try to impose those same conditions on Iran. I think the economic impact for Iran would be problematic, but even more problematic might be the impact on its aging oil fields. If those fields have to be shut in because there is nowhere to store the oil that is produced and there is no possibility of exporting that oil, then those are very old fields. It may be difficult to recover the pressure and enable the same levels of production, which is why I think there is a time constraint on the Iranian side now as well. They will want to ensure that they can continue to export both for financial reasons, but also for the long-term stability of their oil industry.
We've heard the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent say that a little bit of economic pain is worth it in taking on the Iranian regime and ensuring that they don't become a threat to the West. Is this something, do you think, that the Trump administration still firmly believes, given what's happened over the course of the last 6 weeks?
Well, I think the challenge here is that we're not just experiencing a little bit of economic pain. We're feeling it not simply at the gas pumps for those who drive traditional vehicles, but we're also feeling it in the shipping costs for everything that is produced and transported around the world. We're feeling the economic pain in terms of the disruptions to fertilizer and what that will mean for global food supplies. We're also feeling it in terms of other key byproducts of the petroleum industry, including helium, which is key to many tech products. And so, this is a really multifaceted economic challenge at this point in time. And the sooner that it ends, the better it is for everyone, including the United States and including Iran.
What lessons do you think the US administration, the military, the Navy will take away from this war?
Well, I hope that the U.S. administration will, in the future, adopt a more holistic approach to thinking through the potential outcomes to conflicts that are being contemplated. It was well known that the Iranians have threatened on innumerable occasions to target the Strait of Hormuz. It's also been well known and well documented that they have retaliated against their neighbors' economic and energy infrastructure at times of intensive pressure on the regime in Tehran. So all of these were predictable outcomes. And what is still, I think, difficult to understand is why and how the Trump administration and the Israelis, as they made the decision to go forward with a regime change, existential war with Iran, that they didn't plan for and prepare for the inevitable economic fallout that would follow.
Yeah, and the economic fallout, as you say, and also the fact that the Strait of Hormuz could have been used as leverage, which is exactly what the Iranians did in the end. There are those who predicted this, if the United States went to a war with Iran, that the Strait of Hormuz would become an issue.
Yes, Iranian politicians and senior figures within the regime have invoked the intent to close the strait almost in ritualistic fashion every time there is rising tension between Washington and Tehran. We've never seen a full closure of the strait. We've never seen a sustained full closure of the strait. And so we are in, to some extent, unprecedented circumstances. But this reaction, this move by the Iranians was absolutely anticipated by anyone who had studied the behavior of the regime and certainly all those in the U.S. military who have engaged in countless preparatory exercises and planning and strategic documentation in case of any contingency that would require U.S. military action against the regime. So the failure to prepare for and plan for this outcome is still, I think, baffling.
Yeah, I mean, and just briefly, because I do have about a minute left, but, why wasn't there a plan? Because the Fifth Fleet has been there for decades to ensure the safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz.
That's exactly right. I think that there was some magical thinking, both in Washington and among Israeli policymakers as well, who saw that Iran had been significantly weakened by the June war, by Israeli attacks on Iranian proxies around the region, and most proximately by the uprising that took place on the streets of Iranian cities in January. And they came to the very poorly informed assumption that that meant the regime would fold on day one. That was proven wrong.
Suzanne Maloney, really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme. A contagious crisis. The UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, discusses Sudan's war with me as it pushes into a third year.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed. Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty.
War isn't pretty.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now.
It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon.
Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still.
We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist...
My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
Well, let's kick off and make a statement.
What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs?
He's coming out! What more do you need?
Sudan tomorrow enters the third year of a war that's created one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, with evidence of atrocities including widespread sexual violence. The army has been fighting against paramilitary forces since April 2023, triggered by a power struggle between two generals. I spoke about it with the UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher.
It's a grim and a chastening anniversary when you've got over 30 million people needing support, when you've got 2/3 of the country needing some sort of food because of the levels of hunger and starvation, when you've got so many people displaced. This is the world's largest humanitarian crisis, the world's largest displacement crisis, massive levels of violence, sexual violence against women and girls. And of course, it's a contagious crisis because it's affecting neighbouring countries across the region. So 3 years is too long for the Sudanese people to have waited for some kind of respite, and 3 years is too long for the world to have failed.
And you mentioned there the impact on women and girls, children, because they have truly been disproportionately affected by this conflict.
Absolutely. You've seen a weaponization of women's bodies by the parties to the conflict. And I've spent 2 long visits now inside Sudan. Most recently, I spent a week in Darfur and spoke to so many survivors of horrendous sexual violence. Women who'd been gang raped multiple times on the most dangerous road in the world, from El Fasher to Tawila, as they fled to safety. So it's desperately grim situation, and again is part of this climate of impunity and lawlessness, but also part of this wider culture war against women and girls, across societies, across the world. But you see it particularly badly in places like Sudan and the DRC, where rape is being weaponized on such a huge scale.
And we often see rape being used as a weapon of war. Do you believe that in this particular conflict in Sudan, there can ever be any accountability?
We have to keep pushing for it. We have to keep insisting on it. It's easy sometimes to despair in the world right now when you see so little accountability for humanitarians getting killed, for women and girls getting raped, for the way that drones are used against civilians on such a huge scale. So we have to hope for accountability, but right now we don't see much of it.
We've talked about displacement, we've talked about the atrocities, and of course the other thing that the Sudanese people are facing is ongoing hunger. According to a recent report, many people, millions, are surviving on just 1 meal a day, and there are millions of others who are skipping that 1 meal a day because, frankly, the fighting and the catastrophe that we've seen across Sudan is causing hunger on a wide sort of spread scale.
That's right. I mean, 2/3 of people need food right now, and so very, very high levels of hunger and starvation. We've massively scaled up our efforts inside Darfur, but it's still not enough. And now you're finding this conflict spreading, violence across the Kordofan region and the Upper Nile and beyond. So masses, millions and millions in need of that support, and of course pockets of famine as well. And we face several constraints to our work. One is a lack of funding. I mean, the world has just not stepped up to respond to our appeals. Secondly, getting access across the fighting lines to people who so badly need that support. And then logistics. The funding cuts have meant that we can get less food in by air. We're relying more on road convoys. And it takes days to reach these very, very hungry populations.
That's the UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, there. And we'll, of course, have more coverage of 3 years of war in Sudan on the programme tomorrow night. It's been a significant day for Lebanon, the first direct face-to-face talks with Israel. But in truth, not much has changed. The war here continues. We've seen days of escalating violence. We've heard warnings of a displacement crisis. Over 1 million people displaced. That's 1 in 5 people. And of course, we've shown you images of the young children injured and killed, families torn apart. We're going to leave you now with these images of Beirut as this city and this country come to terms with the turmoil here. Good night.